welcome to episode number 12 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm. I'm Sarah Zinek-Roche, I'm your host. You know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you are an entrepreneur who's simply fed up with the traditional marketing model and are ready for a paradigm shift. Oh, I think you'll love today's episode, a conversation with my new friend Steve Morris about the beautiful business. I'm featuring it under the P for product of the Gentle Marketing Mandala, but it really just could fit anywhere because it's so aligned with the Gentle Business Revolution. Real quick before I begin, while you listen to this episode, I'd love for you to go over to thegentlebusinessrevolution.com and download the Gentle Business Manifesto so you can read it later if you haven't yet. There's no opt-in, just an invite to join the Gentle Revolution and read the manifesto and see if it resonates. So here's some more info on Steve. Steve is on a mission to help organizations and their leaders rise to their potential and make a positive impact on the world of their customers. Over the past 25 years, he has worked as an advisor and consultant on brand strategy, organizational life, and humanized marketing strategy. He's been honored to work with more than 250 global, national, and regional companies and 3,000 business leaders. Steve leads his brand and business consultancy, Mth Degree, founded in 1994, which specializes in his proprietary brand evolution programs. His clients include Samsung, Habitat for Humanity, New Balance, Sony, LG, Amazon, NFL, and MLB franchise, and many more. Steve is a regular speaker at events, and make sure to look up his TED Talk, Beautiful Business, on YouTube. He is regularly hired for in-house corporate keynotes, retreats, and workshops for organizations. Steve has written and published 2 books, including Brand Love and Loyalty and Humanizing the Customer Journey, and is working on his forthcoming book, The Beautiful Business. Can you see why I'm so excited? So without further ado, here's my conversation with Steve, which I just know that you'll love. Stephen, I'm so happy to talk to you again. How are you?
I'm very good, Sarah. Thank you so much for hosting this time and our conversation together. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And I thought it would be interesting to share the story of how we met, in quotation marks, because we haven't really met in real life, but we met online. And my business coach, Lisa Peterson, posted this video, that video from Katie Porter, who asks the billionaire JP Morgan CEO why he can't pay his employees a livable wage. So that was the video. And if listeners haven't seen it, you can just probably Google Katie Porter video and you'll find it. So this post then started a controversial conversation with different beliefs. And back then, your comment just really went straight to my heart, and I have copied it and I want to read it. So you said, ultimately, I believe that businesses whose only driving purpose is profit are a dying breed with numbered days. They will be outwitted, out-innovated, overwon by companies that are belief-driven or purpose-driven and create value for all people involved, not just profit. There's great data to support all of this. So I immediately reached out to you, and here we are 4 weeks later.
Very good. Yeah, I don't recall writing that, but it sounds like me.
It sounds like you. Yeah. No, it was just like, wow. And I think it kind of shut up everybody else in the comments. They're like, okay. So yeah, let's start right there. If money will no longer be the number one purpose of business, then what will it be replaced by?
Yeah, I would say this. I would actually challenge the assumption that money was ever the purpose of business. And by that, I simply mean that really you go back in the days of forming of early businesses, and we can go back to the times of, before, money changed hands from one person to the other. We essentially worked with the barter system in our business. So if a blacksmith had a particular trade, and they could perform services which were valuable to somebody else who didn't have blacksmithery capabilities. And so another person who might have other capabilities and other strengths and other even craftsmanship, they would trade goods and services together. And so really money didn't exchange hands with one another. And so really, if you go back to that, you say, okay, really money was never part of it, but it was all about value. And so the barter element had to do with, well, the value of the blacksmith services had to equate to some equal or relative value to, let's say, a leathersmith or something like that, that was valuable to each party. Right. And so my argument would be that we've gotten away from that. And some businesses who, especially in very capitalistic cultures, which there isn't anything wrong with capitalism, I think the sole purpose of business is still to provide value out into the world and to the world of customers who see the value and even the need for the either goods or services that a company might provide. So ultimately, and this is why I believe some companies, like in this particular Facebook string, have gotten away from providing value, where they're really focusing on how much profit they can take literally, and I use the word take intentionally, from customers, and have drifted away from the core purpose of business, which is to provide some valuable goods or services to some need of audience out there. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I see in front of my eyes, I see this scale, right? This balance where it needs to be equal on each side. The money that's being exchanged needs to be equal to the value that's being received. And it feels like that's what's not happening anymore. There's the scale is not balanced. And some of the companies, like you said, they just want to get more money for less value. And I clearly see that. You work mainly with big companies, but I also see that happening with my listeners. So the online space, entrepreneurs, where it seems like there's this game of, how much can I charge and still get away with it? This kind of attitude where it's like, let's see if I can get away with, charging $20,000. And then the problem with that is that when someone dares putting those prices out there, then everybody feels like, oh, but she's charging this much, so I should probably, I can probably charge even more. And so this over the last few years, there's been this thing where prices keep going up, and we're all sitting there wondering, how much value are you really getting out of this $20,000 deal or $100,000 deal? So
yeah.
So would you say that applies also to entrepreneurs and solopreneurs?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as any business thinks about the reason that they're in business, and this is really regardless of size. And while I work with a lot of big businesses, I am working with some smaller businesses. The core question to ask is, what value are you providing to your service, to whom you service, called customers or even customer prospects? And so let's take it from the small business owner or the entrepreneurial perspective. Anytime a business owner thinks about they're going to form a business, the key question to ask is, well, what value do you provide beyond just making money? Which is really, when you drill down into that, that's your purpose question, or what I call, in my world, the brand purpose. And so as a small business thinks about it, and I think it's even more acute or more heightened with a small business, they really have to be very clear on the answer to that question. And part of the answer to that question defines not just what value am I providing, but who am I serving, and what needs do they have in their world, either needs, wants, wishes, or desires do they have in the world that my business is actually fulfilling for them. And I think that's one of the most important questions, not just to ask, but to answer, and answer very clearly in your business. And then once you have a very clear answer to that, make sure that the world understands that. And by the world, I mean the world of how you go out and market and tell your stories and communicate what your business is all about. And to your point earlier, where I see a lot of business owners, big and small, falling into the trap of paying too much attention to their quote unquote competition versus paying very acute attention to, well, what's in it for our customers or for our customer prospects. But again, I think the most important question to ask and answer is, who am I serving and what value am I providing for them that makes their world a better place in some way?
Mm-hmm. What I kind of have changed in my model, the gentle marketing model, especially for the small business owners, entrepreneurs, right? Yes, there's this focus on who am I serving, but since we are the business, I think it's equally important to ask ourselves the question, who am I and what are my values? And then actually go and find the ideal clients who have similar values, because then you're really bringing more joy to your business. Because what happened to me is, for all this time, I was serving an ideal client who didn't have the same worldview that I had. And that kept me stuck and quite miserable, actually. It kept me wearing this mask and pretending that I'm someone that I'm not. So as entrepreneurs, we have this freedom of saying, well, it's my company, so what I think actually really matters. What the way I see the world, the way my values actually matter, maybe even more so than my clients, or at least just as much so. What do you think about that?
I love that articulation. And so we could go into a whole conversation just about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, here in Western culture, most of, and I'll call it corporate America, but it's not just corporate America, for eons, for some time, let's call it decades and maybe even more than a century, businesses have asked people to do something that's quite impossible, which is to check themselves at the door or leave part of themselves at the door. And here's what I mean by that. So when you take a job in an organization, you're supposed to bring only your skill set and not your humanity. Mm-hmm. And when we think about, and this goes to your point, Sarah, the opportunity and really even the responsibility, which is also part of the freedom that an entrepreneur has, we as an entrepreneur can ask ourselves, what is our value system in the world? And how do we want to live our lives? Because there can't be any separation between the person who shows up at work, whatever that work is, mm-hmm. be it if you're a solopreneur, small business entrepreneur, or work for a Fortune 100 company, mm-hmm. you can't leave your humanity at the door. You always bring all of yourself to it. Now, ideally, you're bringing your best self to it, and you're ideally being invited to bring your skill set, your mastery, your own version of your personal genius into your work, which does include your value system. And I believe, and I talk about it in this thing called The Beautiful Business, where we create a connection of belonging, and I know we'll get into this later, by an alignment of value systems. So if I believe, for instance, in the work that I do, which is really what I call brand evolution work, where I work with leaders who have arrived upon the awareness, the awakening that doing business, the typical manners, is no longer working or no longer serves them or no longer serves their customers. I work with these business leaders to infuse their most deeply held beliefs, first understanding what those deeply held beliefs are, including their value system, and infuse that within the leadership team, within the culture, and then ultimately within the brand expression or the marketing function within the organization. Mm-hmm. And this happens equally true for solopreneur business, for, again, a small business who might just have a couple or few employees or up to, say 100 employees, or for larger businesses. And so this brand evolution work is part and parcel to my belief systems in the world, that I believe that we show up as our best in the human capacity that we've been given this gift of life on this planet. And we're here to serve. And we're here to serve with our own version of our own personal genius, and in a way that makes the world a better place. And I believe all businesses can do this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I like what you said about not leaving your humanity at the door. It's shocking to me that that's exactly kind of what happens. Of course, in big corporations, we know that happens still everywhere, or not everywhere, but in many places. But it's even more shocking to realize that that happens also for entrepreneurs, because we just never actually pay attention to who we are and what our values, and kind of start the business only focusing on the customers. So it's a real reframe of the whole model. And we always hear, customer centric is very important. Yes, it is. And it's also important to bring your own, what did you call it? Something with genius, your personal genius.
Your own personal genius. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to bring that to your work in life.
Yeah. And here's what I mean by that, just really quickly. Each of us come into this world wired in a particular way. And where our gifts, where our talents, where our values, where our beliefs meet the world, and meet the world what the world needs from us based on those gifts and talents, is really is kind of the sweet spot, or rather the intersection of our own personal genius. And so if one, for instance, is wired to be very data driven and analytical and things of that nature, they can actually serve the world with that strength in a unique way that someone else who's much more, let's say, creative in their mindset, which would be their own individual genius. And I know I'm sort of generalizing here, but that person who's wired in that particular way, who has that creative mindset, that's how they should go out and serve the world and be more completely themselves in the doing so.
Right. Yeah. Now, you already mentioned the beautiful business, and that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I did my homework and I found your TED Talk with the title, The Beautiful Business. And it was just so intriguing that I wanted to get you on the show and talk more about it. And in his book, A Whole New Mind, Dan Pink, which I know that you've also mentioned in other podcasts that you were on, he has the word design as one of the 6 essential senses we need in order to thrive in the conceptual age. And just like you, I think he doesn't just mean exterior design, but he also talks, like, he means something else by this word design. So I would like you to kind of define this term, the beautiful business, and then go through the 3 pillars, which you already mentioned the first one, which is belonging. So
Yeah.
go through the other 2 as well.
So let's touch real quick on what I think, and I'm interpreting here. I don't know Dan Pink, and I've only met him a couple of times, but I don't know him well. But what I think he meant by design is this idea of the utility of the things that we create, and they could be the design of a product or service or offering, which is enhanced by a sense of significance, then providing exponential value that moves people from one state to another, not just through the utility of it, certainly not just through the aesthetic of it, but rather by the more motivational, intrinsic benefit of it. And so, he talks about this word of significance, or at least I think he does, if I'm remembering his language correctly.
I remember that struck me too.
Yeah, and really that speaks in a way part and parcel to what I mean by the beautiful business. So beautiful business really is all about transcending the transactional world of business into a world of transcendence, so that we have deep relationships with the people that we work with, either with inside the business or what we call our customers, and creating this sense of belonging. So really there's 3 core pillars to what I think about in terms of the beautiful business. It starts with belonging. When we have belonging, and I'll talk about what I think belonging actually means, it can then lead to harmony. And then I'll talk just for a moment about what harmony is. And if those 2 things are in place, it can create this thing called magnetism. So really, belonging has to do with how we're attracted to one another in this world. And, one of the core human drivers in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this sense of belonging. We want to feel connected, not just to the human world, but to the natural world. all of us are sort of living paradoxes. We humans are living paradoxes. We're part, on one side, a physical biology, and then on the other side, we're part animated by unseen forces, which one could call spirituality and or psychology and things of that nature. So then that goes into what drives us, what makes us tick. But we're constantly seeking those places and those people and those groups that we belong to. And it's our value systems that creates the invitation to belong. So you and I are having this beautiful conversation here because primarily, not just because we were introduced by this wonderful person, Lisa, but because we have an aligned sense of values in some way, shape, or form. And because we have that aligned sense of values, we have a sense of belonging, even though we've never met. And that would likely be true for a set of listeners who would tune into this particular podcast and say, wow, what Sarah talks about in her podcast, I feel it really resounds in my life. And so they then have this sense of belonging to your podcast, and you have a sense of belonging to that listenership. And therefore, you're connected to one another. So when that takes place, so when belonging begins to happen, we have this thing called harmony. And harmony is akin to, it's sort of it's more of an artistic version of the word integrity. So integrity is when all systems are integrated with one another. When our biology has a healthy system, we have integrity. So what we believe inside, how our functions are inside, is aligned with how the outside world experiences us. And so when we're in harmony with ourselves, with our beliefs, with our relationships, with the work that we do, and with the customers that we work with, it can deepen that sense of connection, belonging, and move the world forward. And when harmony is in place, then it can create this thing called magnetism. And I believe the best...
Can I just jump in?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the harmony is exactly what was lacking for me when I was working with clients who didn't share my worldview or didn't share my values, right? Because it felt like something was not whole. I was not showing up in my wholeness. And so the harmony was missing.
Yeah. Yeah. And for anyone who might be listening into this conversation, if harmony is either a confusing word or a word that doesn't resound to them, just replace it with integrity. And then when we think about how we live in the world with integrity, to your point, the best parts of us, our belief systems and our values, show up in the world, and we act with integrity. We behave with integrity. We speak with integrity. And the people who we interact with begin to, after a series of experiences, see a person who is integrity. And there's another element that builds trust. And trust is an incredibly important thing when it comes to business relationships. The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, which is a great book written over a decade ago, talks about trust as the core pillar. When our world and our work is in harmony or integrity, it does create trust.
Right. What about magnetism?
Magnetism, yes, indeed. So when belonging and harmony are in place, again, through the lens of the beautiful business, we have this thing called magnetism. And magnetism creates an attraction. So the metaphor here is we are the flame and not the moth. And, when we think about that particular metaphor, we hold our own light, we hold our own center, and we attract like-minded, like-hearted individuals or groups of individuals. In the business world, we would call them customers, or sometimes we'd call them employees or team members, into our own orbit. And so when that magnetism begins to take place, we attract the right kinds of customers, we attract the right kind of people, and we live within the close connection of the world with that deep connection of magnetism.
I love that so much. We also discovered that we're both introverts, right? And that's just an introvert's dream, to have people to come to you rather than hustling to get out there and get more and more prospects. It's so beautiful to think that because you're putting yourself out there with the sense of belonging, that it's creating this harmony, then naturally you are starting to attract the right kind of people, that just seems, beautiful and
Yeah.
magical.
It's interesting. I don't believe that any brand or any business should ever chase customers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that they should all be their own light, hold their own center, and create their own sense of attraction. So you think about a brand like Harley Davidson, they're never, ever chasing customers. They attract people who believe in what they believe and who want to experience their products and even potentially their services in a way that's aligned with what Harley Davidson has been creating for the last couple of decades, the last century. I'm not even sure when they were founded, probably back in the early 1900s. So they don't chase customers. And really, when you think about the best of all businesses, be it a big brand like Harley Davidson or be it a small business who might be providing some really exceptional service, then the challenge or really opportunity is for that business is to broadcast what they believe loudly and clearly enough so that the people who hear that particular signal or beacon, they are attracted to it and they come towards them. And so when we think about marketing, what's the function of marketing? The function of marketing really ultimately is about attracting more of the right kinds of customers, and more of the right kinds of customers create deep loyalty. And then ultimately you get into this function of simple storytelling that attracts, this like attracts like type of situation.
Yeah, so true. The other thing that I found out in my research, it was no surprise to me that you were also a professional artist. So you also paint. And I especially love this quote at the end of your TED Talk. It goes like this: business done beautifully moves us from the realm of transaction into a realm of transcendent experiences. So explain that last term, transcendent experiences. What does that mean when it comes to marketing? And why did I bring up the fact that you're also an artist? Because to me, they kind of go together.
I love it. So Maslow talks about in his psychological processes, including the hierarchy of needs, he talks about this thing called peak experiences. And peak experiences happen when we as human beings experience moments of awe. And those moments of awe transcend space and time and move us from one sense of how we're seeing the world into a completely new sense. So essentially, we see then the world anew. And, part and parcel to my painting practice and the work that I produce there, all of that work is intended to move people from their current way of seeing the world or their current way of experiencing the world into a new way of experiencing the world. And I actually think that business is really all about that too. And so there's deep parallels between these movements or practices of artistry. And that artistry could be elements of leadership artistry or business artistry, or more traditional artistry, which has to do with, in my world as a painting practice. And sort of just a quick side note, I have another business with two partners, and it's called The Studio, and it's part of why I was just in New York. It's a business with two other artists, one of which is a poet who is also a consultant, and the other of which is a composer musician from Ireland who is also a business coach and consultant. And we pulled together the three of us in this weird, beautiful thing called The Studio. And we create these performative spaces and leadership experiences where we work with leaders and with groups of people to infuse the processes of artistry into the business world, so that we invite leaders to become much more wholehearted in the way they're approaching their work, going beyond a transactional experience into a sense of transcendence. And again, that means moving people from their current way of seeing the world to a new way of seeing the world. And when we think about what's the role of the leader, and this is true for any business owner, regardless of size, is, the role of the leader is to essentially create a clear vision and help people move towards that vision and realize that vision. And that's transcendence.
Yeah, it's beautiful. My 7 P's of marketing that I kind of remodeled, I position them instead of the usual circles, I position them in the form of a mandala, because a mandala is a creative process and marketing is a creative process. So what I try to do also is to really show entrepreneurs that marketing can be fun and marketing can be creative, especially if we give ourselves permission to do it our way. So, what would you say to a heart-centered entrepreneur who's struggling with using more creativity in their marketing because maybe all they see out there is these templates and formulas and cookie cutter approaches?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so much talk about marketing. I think it's actually gotten away from its core meaning. And so, to your question, what I would invite entrepreneurs to think about is really consider or reconsider what marketing actually is. And I believe it's ultimately a storytelling experience that happens human to human. And so I wrote an ebook years ago, and I can share a show link on it. I don't have the link up in front of me, called Humanizing Your Marketing. And ultimately, I think marketing is about connecting from the humanity of your business or the beliefs of your business, which are part and parcel, to the humanity of the people that you're talking to. So when we think about business, I think all business is ultimately a human-to-human function, and it's a human activity. It's actually some of the most beautiful human activities that we endeavor upon. So the invitation here is to rethink what marketing actually is, and I would invite them to think about stories that they could tell to their customers about when their business is at their very best and serving their customers in the very best way they can, and to tell those stories to as large audience as you possibly can, and an aligned audience as you possibly can, through the ways that they're going to listen. And that's really just called media channels. It could be social media, traditional media, it could be content marketing, it could be stages that you present on, it could be conferences that you go to, it could be all kinds of different things. But the media matters less than the message. And the message, I believe, ought to be storytelling, and storytelling that attracts and invites the sense of imagination so that the customer prospect can actually see themselves in the story, and the story turns into something that's much more about them, the customer, than it is about the business itself. And as they go about telling those stories, then they can invite the customers to understand what value that particular business provides.
Right. Yeah. Storytelling, we hear it all the time, right? And what I really noticed in my own kind of transformation, it's we are so trained to use I always confuse them. I think it's the left side of the brain, the analytical brain, right? And just like, okay, bullet points and add text and all of that in order to really use storytelling and be able to tell stories that create an emotional connection with the reader. We need to be able to actually turn on that creative side of the brain and really talk to our client and not at our client, because when you think about ads, then we're talking at our clients. And so the storytelling is part of that creative act, really, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of science out there about how people make decisions. And the way I typically talk about that is really twofold. So, and this goes to your point, Sarah, which is really well made. First and foremost, that we as humans apply our intellect into situations. We have to understand something in order to grasp it. But a lot of companies fall trap or victim to the statistics, facts, figures, and the analytical side of helping people understand here's what the business is all about. So, but people don't make decisions on intellect alone. In fact, they actually will make a decision on using intellect, and that is the left side of the brain, which has to do with the analytical and strategic functions of the brain. But we don't act on those decisions until and unless our emotions are engaged, and this is now the right brain thinking. And so when the combination of the two are created, so first and foremost, we understand what the story is all about, but then we're emotionally engaged into that story, then customers are much more likely to act on something. But you really do need both. If we only speak to the heart-centered side of things, then people's intellect is not necessarily engaged, and they may not understand the benefit of what the business actually does.
Yeah, that's so true. We can actually go too far into the feeling and the beauty and all of that. There still needs to be the groundedness, and I think you're so right about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's this other quote in your TED Talk where you say beauty is something we feel. So to end our conversation, what would you say? How can entrepreneurs bring more of these feelings into the marketing, into the stories? How do we actually do that?
Yeah, I go back to what I was talking about with peak experiences and moments of awe.
Mhm.
And I love brands that create transcendent experiences and can evoke this sense of deep, transcendent moments where customers can think very differently about their world and imagine their world very differently because of what's being offered. So, really, my invitation for any entrepreneur that's out there is to think about how do they fully move and what moments of awe have they created for any of their customers, and capture and bottle the beauty that's in that and begin to tell those stories, and tell those stories in a clear enough, succinct enough, and emotionally compelling enough fashion that people both understand it and are also compelled to act on what it is that they're being transcended into. And so, a beautiful business, again, and any business, regardless of size, can be a beautiful business. It can create moments of transcendence. It can create deep, meaningful experiences for the people that we serve out there. And I believe that the best businesses actually do that, whether they're intentional about it or not.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I wrote down earlier when you said that, create moments of awe. And I'm so glad you went back to that, because I think if we have these moments of awe in our daily life already, we feel so, good and happy. Can you imagine a company or a ad or an email makes us feel that way? That's just amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can't wait for that paradigm shift to take place sooner rather than later, so that we all just bring more joy and kindness and moments of awe to our marketing.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Let's do
Thank-
it.
yeah, let's do it, Stephen. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the show. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I have this feeling that we'll have many more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it, and I appreciate how aligned we are. And I invite all your listeners to tap into all of what you're talking about, because I think it's really beneficial to the world. I think what the service that you're providing for the world, not just through your business, but through the conversations that you're holding on this podcast, are quite beautiful. And so I applaud you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, did I overpromise? I believe not. I'm sure you enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait for Steve's new book, The Beautiful Business. I will definitely let you know when it comes out. To find out more about Steve, please check him out at themthdegree.com, stephenmorris.gallery, and studioleadership.com. So these are the different sites. We'll link to them in the show notes as usual as well. And again, the TED Talk is called The Beautiful Business, and you can find that on YouTube as well. Steve also has some free toolkits he's graciously sharing with the listeners. So you can find those at themthdegree.com brand-evolution-toolkit. And the second one is about humanizing the customer journey, and you find that at themthdegree.com/humanizing-ebook. Again, the links are in the show notes, and the show notes can be found at sarasantacroce.com/GBR12. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. Next week, I'll cover the P of pricing, and I riff about fair pricing. So I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm. And please invite your friends to join us by sharing this podcast or the Gentle Business Manifesto with them. Both can be found at thegentlebusinessrevolution.com. Let's be the change we want to see in the world.